Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Yud Gimel is primarily Agarata. It begins with halacha, discussing the statement that a Talmud quoted in the name of Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara will discuss that briefly. The Gemara will want to know how Rabbi Akiva is different than the Tanakama in our Mishnah on that subject. The Gemara will then identify who the Talmud is, and that'll take us into a long discussion about that Talmud's history and whether he learned from Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Akiva or both, and in what order. The Gemara will briefly discuss a halacha, which he discussed with the two of them. And then the Gemara will get into Rabbi Meir and some of his greatness and his Talmidim, and Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai and the machlokesim that they always had between them. We'll determine some of them, and a few famous Gemaras about Eilu Veilu Divrei Elokim Chaim and the Baskal are here. And all the way at the end of the Daf, the Gemara brings another Mishnah, and this Mishnah will take us back to the halachas of the Kaneh, the crossbeam at the entrance to a Mavoi, and how big, large, or strong it has to be. So first of all, let us begin. We had seen in our most recent Mishnah a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to what size opening of a mavoi requires extra devices to make it permitted to carry within the mavoi. The question was, where is this machlokes? We could leave the machlokes aside for now, but in what size mavoi opening does this machlokes apply? The Tanakama had not given a limit to it. Anything obviously 10 amas or under. However, a Talmud came to Rabbi Akiva and he said that I learned from Rabbi Shmuel that it's only 4 amas to 10 amas. Less than 4 amas, there's no machlokes. Everybody agrees you just need the minimum koira, the minimum beam, according to the way the Gemara was adjusted in Daf Yud Beis. So the Gemara said, the Mishnah said that Rabbi Akiva disagreed, and Rabbi Akiva said no, the machlokes applies in all cases. There is no limit under 4. So the Gemara now asks that Rabbi Akiva comes out the same as the Tanakama. Those are two very similar opinions. They both say that there is no limit to this machlokes. So why do we have two separate opinions here? So the Gemara says there is a difference between the two of them, and the difference is, what if the mavoi opening is 4 tfachim or less? So we had seen a statement of Rav Achli or possibly Rabbi Yechiel yesterday on Daf Yud Beis, discussing do you need anything at all when it's 4 tfachim? And on that's where there's a difference between the Tanakama of the Mishnah and Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, who was disagreeing with the Talmud quoting Rabbi Shmuel. And the Gemara says we don't know which said which. We do not know if it was Rabbi Akiva, the Tanakama, who said that at 4 tfachim there's no machlokes, there's nothing required, or if the same machlokes applies all the way down to 0. So that remains undetermined over here. So now the Gemara quotes another brisa, which has another account of this discussion between the Talmud and Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says that the Talmud came and he said over in front of Rabbi Akiva the halacha that he learned from Rabbi Shmuel that at 4 amas and under there's no machlokes, and Rabbi Akiva said no, Rabbi Shmuel never said such a thing. And then Rabbi Akiva said, and the halacha is like this Talmud. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? If Rabbi Akiva disagreed and said Rabbi Shmuel never said it, why would Rabbi Akiva say that the halacha is like him? So the Gemara offers two interesting answers. The Gemara either says, first of all, Rabbi Akiva was not saying really that the halacha is like him. He was just trying to inspire his other Talmidim to think on their own and not just say things over. Just like this Talmud thought on his own and he said something over which Rabbi Shmuel never said. Interestingly, though, he quoted it in the name of Rabbi Shmuel. But Rabbi Akiva was trying to inspire them to say their own thing. So he praised the Talmud and said, what you said is good. You said very nice. So that was what he was trying to do. And the other thing is that this version is slightly wrong. This is the other answer, and it's not that Rabbi Akiva said that the halacha is like the Talmud, because it's not, because Rabbi Shmuel never said it. But Rabbi Akiva was saying that the Talmud's words are good. It makes sense. It's logical. What he's saying is logical. Okay, now who is this Talmud? So Yeshua ben Levi says, anytime you see a Talmud quoting Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was the Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel, who then went to learn with Rabbi Akiva or from Rabbi Akiva. So that's why he would be quoting things in his name. And now the Gemara is going to bring another example of something that Rabbi Meir quoted from Rabbi Shmuel to Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara is going to have a contradictory version of this incident. The Gemara will try to resolve the contradiction and also discuss the specific halacha that was brought. So what is this about? So the Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa discusses making ink to write a Sefer Torah or other holy writings. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Meir, who was a cipher, he was a scribe, used to write all the time, he put a chemical called cancantum into the ink. A cancantum is a black dye, which is very strong. It's not easily erased. Now, the issue is that there's a possible limud from a pasuk that the writing has to be erasable, and this cancantum is not really erasable. Now, what happened exactly? So there's two versions of this. According to the first version, Rabbi Meir first learned by Rabbi Yishmael, and he put cancantum into the ink, and Rabbi Yishmael didn't have a problem with it. Then he went to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva said you're not allowed to do that. According to the second version, Rabbi Yehuda first learned by Rabbi Akiva, and he put cancantum into the ink, and Rabbi Akiva didn't have a problem with it. Then he went to Rabbi Shmuel, and he did have a problem with it. So we have two contradictions here. The first contradiction is the order. Did he first go to Rabbi Shmuel, did he first go to Rabbi Akiva? The second one was who said mutter and who said aser. Was it Rabbi Akiva or was it Rabbi Shmuel? Now, before we discuss those two contradictions, the brisa continues, and it explains how Rabbi Shmuel said that there was a problem with the ink. So the Brisa records the conversation. Rabbi Shmuel said to Rabbi Meir, he said, "My son, what is your work?" He said, "I'm a cipher, I'm a scribe." So he said, "You better be very careful because the cipher holds the entire universe in his hands. If you put on an extra letter or you take off a letter, you can sometimes end up destroying the universe." So Rashi gives an example. If you write Hashem Elokechem MS, but you leave the aleph off the word MS, then chas v'shalom, you're saying something which will destroy the universe. And also, if it says Vayedaber Hashem and you say Vayedabru, you write that, so that's implying that there is more than one chas v'shalom, and that would be as destructive as the first. So Rabbi Meir answered him as follows. He said, "I'm very careful with the letters. I know always where there is a extra letter or a missing letter, and I write it correctly. Not only that, but there's another potential problem is that sometimes, let's say you write the dalid, and a fly lands on a corner of the dalid, and it erases the corner, and it ends up looking like a resh. So I'm very careful to make sure that it doesn't happen either, and that's why I put cancantum in my ink." So, according to this version, Rabbi Shmuel said to me, not allowed to do that, because when the Torah describes the procedure for a saita, it says that you have to write down the parsha of the saita on a piece of parchment, and then you have to erase the writing into water. So you see that it says v'chasav u'mochak. So you see that all writing has to be a type that's erasable. And cancantum is not erasable, so you're not allowed to do it. Okay, so that's the price. So now the Gemara says, let's discuss these contradictions. First of all, who did he go to first? Was it Rabbi Shmuel or was it Rabbi Akiva? The Gemara answers, actually, he went to Rabbi Akiva twice. He first went to Rabbi Akiva, but he found it difficult to learn from him. He was too sharp. So then he went to Rabbi Yishmael, and there he learned all the halachos, all the mishnayos, he learned them. And then he went back to Rabbi Akiva to discuss the svara and the contradictions and try to answer the kashas and all those things. So now, what about the contradictory halachos? The Gemara leaves it kasha. The Gemara does not have a rejoinder for that it records. Okay, now the Gemara wants to discuss specifically this halacha. Are you allowed to put cancantum into the ink or not? So there's two questions here. First of all, the issue is, this cancantum, it makes it not erasable. Is that an issue everywhere, or is that an issue only for the parsha of saita, which has to be erased? Now, that is really part of a greater issue. That is, can you use a Sefer Torah for the parsha of saita? When you need to erase the saita words to create that special water with ink erased into it that she drinks, can you have to write especially for her, or can you use any Sefer Torah and just take that parsha, take those words, erase it in the ink, and use that? So the Gemara quotes a brisa, which as Rabbi Yehuda says that Reb Meir used to say that you're allowed to write any Sefer Torah with cancantum, except for the parsha of saita. Meaning, in that Sefer Torah, the letters that you're using to write the parsha of saita, you shouldn't use cancantum, because it has to be erased. that implies that you could use the Sefer Torah for the Parsha of Saita. Now Rabbi Yaakov disagrees. He says no. What Rabbi Meir had said was that except for the Parsha of Saita, where you're writing it separately for the Saita procedure on a parchment in the Beis Hamikdash to actually use. When you're writing a Sefer Torah and you're just writing those words, you're not going to use that for a Saita ever, and therefore you don't have to worry. You don't have to make sure that that's erasable. Okay. Now the Gemara explains that the machlokes between the two is: are you allowed to use the parsha of Saita that is actually written in the Torah for a Saita procedure, or do you have to write one specially for her? And the issue seems to be: does it have to be lishma? When you write that parsha for her for a specific Saita, let's say for Rivka, so does it have to be written with the intent to use for Rivka, or could you just use anything? So the Gemara compares this to another machlokes, which we find. The Gemara tries to say that these two machlokes line up, and then the Gemara will say that they do not line up. What's that machlokes? So machlokes is if you have a parsha written specially for a saita, and then that saita ends up admitting, and so she never drinks, and so it's never erased. So now you have the parsha written out. Can you use it for a different saita? It's a question of lishma. You wrote it for one lady. Can you use it for a different lady or not? So that's a machlokes between Rav Achi bar Yeshaya, who says that you could, and a Tanakama in that Brisa who says that you cannot. So the Gemara compares the two. The issue, the machlokes between them seems to be: does it have to be lishma? Does it have to be written for her? So the same machlokes should be the machlokes about: are you allowed to use an actual Sefer Torah which was not written lishma for a specific saita? So Rav Papa says no. These two machlokes do not line up. Either Tana and this machlokes could hold the opposite way about a Sefer Torah. The one who says that you can't use one written for Rachel. For Leah, that could be because you wrote it specifically for one, and therefore you can't use it for somebody else. But if it's the Sefer Torah which wasn't written for anybody, maybe you could use it for either of them. And it works the other way as well. The one who says that you can use it from one saita to another, if you wrote it for Rachel, you're allowed to use it for Leah. That could be because at least it was written for a saita. It wasn't specific to this one, but it was written for a saita. But the parsha of a Sefer Torah, the actual piece in a Sefer Torah, in Shul, in the Aron Kodesh, that wasn't written for a saita at all, that you can't use, and therefore the two machlokes don't line up, and they don't compare. Now the Gemara asks, hold on a second, according to the one who says that it doesn't have to be lishma, but does that mean to say that a get, a bill of divorce, also doesn't have to be lishma? We know it says clearly that you can't use a get written for one person for somebody else, even if all the names are the same, the name of the husband, the name of the wife, the name of the city. You can't use it if it wasn't written specifically for this couple, for this woman. So Gemara says, well, that's different over there. It says v'chasav lo. It says it has to be written for her. It has to be written specifically for this person, not for somebody else with the same name. So Gemara says, well, here it also says v'asala. It says you have to make this entire procedure of saita for her. Gemara says that's different. When it says v'asala, it doesn't say you should write it for her. It says you should do it for her. That's talking about the erasing. The erasing of the parsha in the water has to be done specifically for this lady. If it's written for somebody else, that's not a problem. That's what this opinion holds, and that's why he says you're allowed to use it from one written for somebody else. Okay. Now the Gemara goes into a Gadata about Rabbi Meir. Once we were discussing Rabbi Meir and who he learned from, the Gemara speaks about him. It says Rav Acha bar Chanina says that Rabbi Meir was the greatest of his generation by far, and that's known to Hashem. The reason why the halacha was often not like him, or usually not like him, is because he had a practice where he would defend wrong positions just as forcefully as he defended correct positions. He did that in order to sharpen himself and others, and he would give reasons, proofs, and explanations for the wrong approach as much as the right approach, and the Chachamim didn't know which one he really held of. They couldn't paskin like him because they didn't know what his actual opinion was. The Gemara interrupts here and adds that Rabbi Meir's name wasn't really Meir. His name was possibly Nehorai. He was called Meir because he lit up the entire world with his Torah. He was possibly called Nehorai because also he lit up the Chachamim's eyes with his Torah. It's a similar root, Reish Aleph Yud. But his name might have not even been Nehorai. It could be that his real name was Nehemiah, or possibly he's actually Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, nonetheless. Okay. Now, Rebbe said that I became so great in Torah, and I became sharper than my Chaverim because I sat behind Rabbi Meir in the Shir, and just by seeing his back, I was able to become so great. Had I seen his face, I would have become even greater. And this is based on the pasuk that says, your eyes should see your teachers and your scholars. On the subject of defending wrong positions, the Gemara says that Rabbi Yevo says the name of Rabbi Yechanan, and that Rabbi Meir had a Talmud named Sumchus, who did the same thing. For every single thing that was Tameh, he gave 48 reasons that it should be Tahar, and every single thing that was Tahar, he gave 48 reasons that it should be Tameh. There was another Talmud in Yavneh who gave 150 explanations as to why a sheretz, a dead rodent, one of the 8 that is specifically listed as Tameh in the Psukim, so he gave 150 reasons, proof that it should actually be Tahar and it should not cause Tumah. Obviously, they're all wrong because the Torah specifically says that they do cause Tumah. But he had 150 good, logical, halachically sound reasons, but they were all wrong, and he was doing it in order to sharpen their skills. Now Ravina says, I'll bring one. My proof is as follows. Think about it. A snake, a poisonous snake, doesn't cause Tumah. It itself is not Tameh. However, it causes more Tumah than anything else. It kills other creatures and causes them to be sources of Tumah. So it itself obviously has a lot of Tumah within it if it can do that. And yet, it doesn't become Tameh itself when it dies. So a rodent which doesn't kill anybody should for sure not become Tameh. So Gemara says that's not a good actual proof, because a snake doesn't kill people or creatures. It doesn't put tumah into them. It just kills them, just like as if a thorn got stuck in its throat. It doesn't put tumah in. It kills them, and the tumah comes by virtue of the death itself. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, their machlokes throughout the years, and how we decide it. The Gemara says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about many things for 3 years, and each one said the halacha is like us, no, the halacha is like us, until a voice came out of Shemaim and said, both of your opinions are divrei elikim chaim, they're the words of the living God. Now, there's many Mefarshim explain what this means. How could 2 opposite conflicting opinions both be the word of Hashem? The simplest shot is that Hashem says over both of them, he discusses both of them, and this is why this Gemara is here, because even saying a incorrect reason or a non-halachic reason is still Torah. It's still part of Torah itself, and it's still Divrei Hashem. And we should still learn it and get schar for it. The halacha, however, can only be determined one way, and therefore there is only one halacha. And the halacha that was said according to Beis Hillel, that's what the Bas Kol, the voice from heaven, explained. So now the Gemara says, why? Why is it that Beis Hillel had the halacha follow them? So the Gemara says because they were more pleasant in their ways, and they were more humble, and they would say Beis Shammai's opinion. Whenever they said their own opinion, if Beis Shammai had a different way of reading it, they would explain Beis Shammai's opinion, and they would explain why they disagreed, and how Beis Shammai's psukim could be understood according to them. They didn't just reject it out of hand. Not only that, says the Gemara, they even quoted Beis Shammai before themselves. The Gemara quotes a discussion where we see this. There's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about somebody who's in the sukkah, and he himself is seated in the sukkah, but his table is outside the sukkah. So Beis Shammai said that's no good. It's Gzeir D'Rabbanan. We're afraid you're going to end up eating outside the sukkah. Beis Hillel said no, it's okay. So the Gemara says Beis Hillel said that Beis Shammai was there not an incident where the elders of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and there it is, there they quote Beis Shammai before Beis Hillel, the elders of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both went to visit Rav Yochanan ben Acharanis. They found him sitting in this exact way. He was in the sukkah, but the table was outside the sukkah. And they said to him nothing. They didn't say anything. So obviously you see that they both agreed that it's okay to eat that way. And Beis Shammai said that wasn't the story. The story was that they said to him, if this is what you're doing, if this is how you sit, so then your whole life you never did the mitzvah of sukkah properly. Okay, now the Gemara adds, we learn from the fact that the halacha followed Beis Hillel and their humility. And we learn from that a few things. We learn that anybody who makes himself low and humble, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem will raise him up. However, anybody who climbs to heights, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will end up dropping down. Somebody who goes looking for greatness, the greatness flees from him. Somebody who flees from greatness, the greatness will chase him. Somebody who forces the time, meaning he forces himself into a position, he's constantly trying and working hard to gain a position, he'll end up finding that he will not receive it. With somebody who waits for the right time to come to him, then the time will come and he will achieve whatever it is that he wants to achieve in the right time. It's important not to force the issue. Okay, now the Gemara quotes another brayso about the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and this is about a specific issue. They argued about, is it easier for a person to have been created or to never have been created? Beis Hillel said it's easier to have been created, and Beis Shammai says it's definitely easier to not have been created. The Gemara says this Machlokes went on for 2.5 years until they voted, and they paskin that the halacha is, it is easier for a person to have not been created. It's not better for him, but it's easier. Living is hard. You got a lot of responsibilities. However, now that he's alive and he's been created, he should make sure to do things correctly, and he should therefore make a calculation of his activities all the time to make sure that he's doing mitzvahs and not averos, or possibly that he's doing his mitzvahs, even those he should check to make sure that he's doing them correctly and there isn't any negative aspects to the mitzvah itself. End of Gemara. Now we have Mishnah, and this will end off the daf for us. The Mishnah says as follows: the beam, the crossbeam, which you have on the entrance to a maveh to make it permitted to carry within, what does it have to be? So it's got to be a certain width. What's the width? It has to be as wide as an ariach. An ariach is half a brick called levena. A levena was three tvachim, so this brick is a tefach and a half. Yet the Mishnah says that the beam only has to be one tefach. The Gemara is going to ask, what happened to the extra half a tefach? Now the question is, does it only have to be as wide as the brick? Does it also have to be strong enough to actually hold up the brick? So that's a machlokes. The Tanna Kama says it's got to hold the brick. Rabbi Yehuda says it does not have to hold the brick. The Mishnah continues and says that if it's made out of straw, that's not a problem. We don't look at the material. This is only about size. If it's straw or reeds, we view it as if it was made out of steel. If it's bent, we view it as if it was straight. If it's round, meaning it's a rounded pole, it's not a square pole, we view it as square. So as far as width, the width would be the diameter of the pole, not the circumference of it. And the Gemara here says that if the circumference is 3 tefachim, then you can assume that the diameter is approximately 1 tefach, because that is the ratio of diameter to circumference. End of Daf Yud Gimel.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.